felt my heart break. But I'm still here.
So I don't know what that brought up for you. I'm still here. And all that that means. So what I want you to do for about 30 seconds is look at somebody beside you and say, I'm still here, and see what happens with that 30 seconds of conversation. Yeah, I just heard somebody do a big exhale. I think that song spoke volumes to lots of us about our lives and all the things we have gone through, and knowing that we have survived all of that, and we're still sitting here. And we're ready to look at our possibilities. Hence, we've been looking at this on Wednesday night and on Sunday morning. Because this little bitty book that I didn't bring with me this morning is such a tiny little book that you could sit and read it through in about a couple of hours. But it is so profound, it could take you the rest of your life to live it. And I've had many people say that have been studying the class with me on Wednesday night, this stuff is kind of hard. Yeah, it is kind of hard to really live that. Because when you begin to think about the agreements that you have made, and I'm so very glad that you wore white pants this morning, because you and I had an interchange on the internet on Facebook, because I had this outfit in my closet, and the first thing that I thought about when I looked at it yesterday was, my mother would tell you don't wear white after Labor Day. And that I could not wear it again till Easter. And I was like, I'm not going to agree to that anymore. And I use that because aren't we aware of the agreements we have made and how they keep us stuck? I mean, this is kind of silly. It's like, okay, and I was so grateful that you had on white pants. I was like, woo! I'm not going to be the only person that has white pants on. But what kind of agreements do we make with our parents, with our teachers, with our partners, with each other, and then think, I don't know that I want to do that for the rest of my life. I don't even remember agreeing to it, but they think I did, so somehow or other, you know. I will tell you I'm not going to my mother's this afternoon. At least not in this. Because that would just open up a big can of worms. What, Kathy?
Go back to the first agreement.
Yes, go back to that first agreement and say, looky here, Mom, look what I've got on. So the first agreement was to be impeccable with your word. That really means, on a deep level, speak with integrity. I loved in her song where it talked about, you know, I've said things, then I've gone, did that really come out of my mouth? I think we all have. And then you wish you could pull it back in, but it's already been said. And then you try, has anybody ever tried to clean it up and then it gets worse? It's like, well, I shouldn't have even said anything else at all because that just made it uglier. Any of you that have ever been in any meetings with me or groups of people, I always say, when I'm in those groups of people, I'm thinking, and sometimes I'm thinking out loud. And so I'm going to say stuff and just know we can clean it up later because I'm just going to let it come out. And, Deb may look at me and go, God, did she say that? So we'll clean it up later. You've known me a long enough time. It's like, I know that that's going to come out of your mouth. Don't take anything personally. That is difficult. It's very difficult. I did it yesterday in a meeting. Took something personally that somebody said. And then I thought I needed to say something, and I did. And I think we kind of got it semi-worked out. But it's very easy to take things personally. Very easy. Refuse to eat emotional poison. And refuse to give it. Refuse to take it, refuse to receive it, refuse to give it to other people. So today, I just could not resist. I'm getting to that age where a bunch of old women get together and go, oh, did you hear about me? And wear white, did you see she wore white pants today? Bless her heart, she doesn't know any better. Yeah, bless her heart. I have no idea what those women are assuming, but something big. Something huge. And we've all been a part of that group before. We have. It's like getting a whole group of people together and going, oh, did you see her? Wow. I know you've heard that before. When you assume something, it makes an ass out of you and me, right? Right? So, why do we assume when we know that it's probably not even anywhere close to the truth? Anywhere close. When I assume, I do not ask for clarification. I just make an assumption that I know what that person thinks. Have you ever had somebody say to you, well, you think blah, 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 and you're like, I don't really think that at all. But I'm going to now because you gave me that idea. Maybe I should think that. But we all do that sometimes, make an assumption what somebody else is thinking about. And we don't ask. Or we don't say anything. We just leave. I'm going to go home. And I'm not going to do that anymore because I don't like what that person said. It may have had nothing to do with you. When I assume, I believe what? I'm right. I know I'm right. Right? Haven't you? Yeah, Dr. Hugh just said, damn right. Yes, I know that I am right. And I know that I know what you're thinking. Right? And then we do this. We do what? I defend my belief. And I dig a bigger, deeper hole. You understand that? And then I just get down in it and keep digging. Because I just have made that assumption and I can't say, you know what, that was wrong. I won't even get into what went on this week in politics. But some of you know and have seen pictures and went, huh, interesting. Right? Yeah. I had somebody yesterday in the middle of a group, oh, that was you, wasn't it, that said we could use a magic marker and just make what we want it to be. It was like, we could. Of course, that's us assuming that he knew better than that. I don't know. And we try to make the other person wrong when we assume things. Right? So how do you go through something when you really, really know Matt? How do we deal with that and not make an assumption? That's difficult, is it not? Because then when I go out in the world, I start talking about it. And the thing I noticed about myself is, would I rather sit around and talk about that or talk about the possibilities for my life? Yes. Does that make sense? It's like whether or not somebody thought the hurricane was going to go to Alabama or not. Why would I sit and talk about that? Over and over and over. And when it was on the news, over and over and over. I'm like, why are we talking about this? Why are we not talking about the possibilities of what we could do or where we could be? So, when do I make assumptions? Think about that on the inside, because in a minute you're going to talk to a friend or an enemy, either one. When do I make assumptions? Would the situation have been different if I had not assumed? And what will I do differently next time? So have a conversation with someone close to you about where, when, what environments, where do you make assumptions? So has anybody noticed how much energy is in the room right now? What do you think that's about? This is something we all do. We all do it somewhere in certain situations. And there's a lot of energy about it, about whether I'm right or wrong. What if, again, we put that energy into the possibilities of our life and let it go over here? Just think about that. How things in your life could shift if you spent all the energy of making assumptions and taking things personally and put it over into creating your life to be what you want it to be. No hurricanes in Alabama. There you go. But seriously, how much time do I, as an individual, take out of my wonderful, marvelous day to take things personally and make assumptions? So just think about that for a minute. Proverbs probably might have been written by Solomon, who was supposedly the wisest man. And the book of Proverbs are just all kinds of little snippets of ways to live your life that are supposed to be wise ways to live. And so when we were talking about not making assumptions on the Wednesday night we were talking about that, we read this scripture. Plans go wrong without talking together. Huh. Can you understand that? That if we don't take the time to sit down and talk about stuff, then that's when we start making assumptions and taking things personally. That's not always easy. Because then sometimes the person that you need to talk to doesn't want to talk to you. And then you make another assumption about what that's about. But they will go well when wise men, and there's the kicker, not just men, wise women, talk about what to do. Now, if Solomon was standing here today, I don't know if he would clarify that a little bit. But some things, I'll just be honest with you, you can't talk to some people about until they make some movement in consciousness. Does that make sense? If you've ever tried to have those conversations with somebody that wasn't ready for that conversation, it never goes well. And then my experience is then I assume I did something wrong or something ugly about them, which then is not going to help the situation at all. So the next thing you're going to talk to somebody about is, how do I know when I am wise enough and that person is wise enough to have this discussion? Go. So my sweet partner Judy always tells me, don't do mental warfare with an unarmed person. Don't do mental warfare with an unarmed person. I know that may sound a little weird to you, but that kind of goes with that scripture. And are you wise enough to know when it's time to have the conversation and when it's not time? Because if you do try to have the conversation too early, then you may never be able to have a conversation. The purpose of the third agreement is to understand how important it is to state our thoughts, just state them, to voice our needs, oh dear God, and to ask for additional information. What would that look like with someone before you made an assumption to just say, you know, this is my personal thoughts and my need is blah, blah, blah. How does that feel to you? Can we have a conversation about this? Tell me more about what's going on in your mind. Because then I'm not making an assumption. But do I know when it's time to even do that with another individual. Because sometimes in my need to have those conversations, I have an expectation of what it's going to look like. That's another big old assumption. And when it doesn't look like kissy, lovey at the other end, and sometimes it does not, then it's like, uh-oh. So again, not making an assumption is a huge, huge, huge piece of what goes on in our world all day, every day. As I prepared for these different agreements every week, I just would pay attention. And if you just listen to the news for 20 minutes, you can hear multiple assumptions about all kinds of things. That part of me wanted to go, and you know that how? And have you ever met that person? Do you really know anything about that person? No. So the other piece about assumptions that I want us to look at is this. How many of you have ever had somebody, a thought of somebody go through your mind and you think, I really need to call that person? But they're probably busy. Or maybe they don't have time to talk. Or, I would really like to do something with that person. But what if they don't want to do something with me? I want you to look at these right here. And the last conversation you're going to have with a friend is, what is one of those things that I could do this next week? Call somebody that I miss? Invite somebody for coffee, explain something to someone about my need to be understood or to understand where they're coming from, to ask a question, to say, I don't like this. Did you realize you could say that? I don't like this. Would the world stop spinning in the right direction if you said that? Some of you think it might. I don't like this. Should I tell him what I did this morning? My sweetie likes to beat on things. Play the drums. We were in the car. You can't get away from it there. She had a box in the car. She was beating on it. I very nicely said, I really don't like that. Would you stop? Yeah, sure. We only lived 5-7 minutes. Within 35 seconds, it was happening again. I said, if you don't quit doing that, I'm going to throw that box out the window. I didn't say I'm going to throw you out the window. But that was my next thought. Do we understand that we can say to somebody, I don't like this? Don't make an assumption. How many of us have sat in the middle of not liking something for a day, for a year, for 20 years, for 35 years? I don't like this. I want something. You ever wanted something but been afraid to ask for it? What if they don't want to give it to me? Have you ever loved someone and wanted to tell them but were afraid? Yeah. We just have one life. We have to keep it simple. So show the person beside you, just talk to them about one of those things you're willing to do this week. Go.
Yeah, that's cold.
I don't know.
And of course, it has other things.
know. Besides, during the day while I'm at work. I don't know. I leave the office at 4:30. I'm going to get back to this end of the road about 5. He started destroying my kitchen.
So you've got some homework. So I want to talk about, for the last 4 or 5 minutes, something more serious. The assumption that somebody else is going to do it. And that's the assumption many of us are living with in our world today. Somebody else is going to take care of it.
Yeah, it's an assumption my teenagers make with their traditions.
And this is not being political, hear me, because I don't want to do that. But we cannot assume that we're going to continue to be a democratic country if we just let somebody else take care of it. So the number one thing I will do that I know as a minister I can do legally is if you have not yet voted, you need to vote. It's important. Very important. But the other thing I'm going to do is tell you a story of this woman. This is Queen Esther. And I want you to hear these words because you're going to hear them again at the end. For such a time as this. And if there has ever been for such a time as this, it's right now. Yes. It is time. The king, if you read different versions, he's called different things. I call him the king. In some versions, he's called Ahasuerus. In some versions, he's called Xerxes. Both of those are difficult to say. I'm just going to say the king. The king of Persia. He had 2 main men that worked for him. One of them was Haman. And he believed very much that Haman was a very upstanding individual. And he made that assumption. But Haman kept coming to the king and saying, our problem in Persia is all the Jews, and we need to kill them and get rid of them all. Huh. Anything sound familiar? There was another man in his court called Mordecai that was paying attention to all this, because when all this started happening, Vashti, who was the king's wife, died. And the king put out an edict in the land that he wanted a new wife. And so all the beautiful women who wanted to be the queen started coming forward. Haman brought some women. And Mordecai had a cousin named Esther. And he thought she might could be the queen. But guess what? She was a Jew. But he thought, this might be the time for such a time as this. If he falls in love with her, maybe he won't listen to this other man over here. So, to make a long story short, the king falls in love with Esther, and he marries her. And then things get crazier and crazier, and the king is listening more and more to Haman, and he is getting ready to kill a bunch of the Jews. Because he has talked him into the fact that that's the problem with our country, is the Jews. We need to kill them all. And so Mordecai had a conversation with Esther, who was nervous because she said, if he finds out I'm a Jew, then he's going to cut my head off too, because he had been known to do that. Mordecai said, honey, you have to be brave. You have to be the one that goes in and talks to him and says, number one, I need to let you know that I'm a Jew. And number two, I need you to not kill all of my people. I want you to think about, if you were any of those people in that story, what you might be assuming. The king assumed that he could trust Haman's judgment and that he was a good and honest man. He assumed that, or he wouldn't have put him in such a high place. Haman assumed that the king was weak and would let him do whatever he wanted to. So he fed the king information. These Jewish people are the ones that are messing up everything, and we need to kill them all. Esther, she was making some assumptions that if she walked in and said what she needed to say to the king, he might cut her head off, because he had been known to do that. Mordecai was actually the one in the story that made less assumptions and kept pushing her to do what was right. If you know the story, she asked to come in to speak to the king. This was a different culture. This was a different time. Even though she was his wife, she couldn't just come in and go, hey, how are you? She had to be invited. And since she had not been invited, she asked if she could talk to him. And so when you think about, I'm going to go back to this picture for a moment, some big doors opening up, and the king sitting on a big throne, and her getting ready to walk in. The other thing she had to pay attention to was when the king saw whoever was standing there, if he held his scepter out, you were invited in. If he did not hand his scepter out, can you imagine what she felt in that moment of standing there, knowing that was hers to do for such a time as this? And the doors opened, and she stepped up, and he held his scepter out. And she came in, and she told him the truth. And if you've ever read that story, it all has a very happy ending, except for Haman. And so what I want to ask you this morning is this. Where are you personally making the assumption that somebody, dear God, is going to do something? The air's just been sucked way in. Where have you decided somebody, dear God, is going to do something? And I'm not saying for us all to go to Washington, D.C. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying get busy in your own neighborhoods. Get busy in the politics that go on in this city. Vote. Know who's running. Pay attention to what people are saying, because it is so important for such a time as this. Namaste.
So this was a lyric that I sent to Denise after I'd sent the 2 songs that I thought I was going to do. And this was one that is brand new. I just literally wrote it. And I couldn't not send it because it felt really appropriate. And I knew when I sent it, it was like, oh, she's going to pick it, she's going to pick it, I know she's going to pick it. Because I was still writing it, you know? And sure enough, she's like, do whatever you want for the first two, but I want that song. So this is the song, and it's brand spanking new. And anybody who's an artist knows that whenever they birth a child like this in public, it's very vulnerable. So thank you for being my lovely midwives. I know where I belong. It's where my heart beats strong. And love and light and grace, they fill me. And it's a miracle to finally feel. I've wasted so much time in this haunted pantomime, thinking that's just the way it is and is always gonna be. And it's amazing to finally feel, oh, I'm free. I'm free. So many want to tell me what I can and cannot do. I finally understand what they're saying is the truth. I finally found my voice. I know I have a choice. Go right, go left, go anywhere I wanna be. And it's incredible to finally feel, oh, I'm free. I'm free. Don't know what time it is, I don't care. Got a date with destiny, I'm gonna be there. So you keep yours, now keep mine. Gonna reach for the stars, I'm gonna shine. I know where I belong. It's where my heart beats strong. And love and light and grace, they fill me. It's a miracle, oh, to finally feel I'm free. I'm free.
last Sunday of every month, we're going to have a separate bucket up here for your change. Be saving up your change all month long. And I just had a vision while I was thinking about that a moment ago of the prosperity team rolling like thousands of quarters. So, yeah, let's make them do that. Not next Sunday, not the Sunday after that. This is a 5-Sunday month. It'll be on the 29th, so be sure and be saving up your change for that. Take your tithes and offerings in your hand and say the affirmation with me if you would, please. May we cherish the gifts of the Creator we have been given. May we hold the beauty of this world close to our hearts. May we embrace the spirit of giving and receiving on earth. May there come to all people, all animals, all living things, an abundance of the earth's greatest gifts: health, love, peace, and overflowing joy. In the name of all that is holy, we say amen and amen.
exhale. And we are here, Living Loving Spirit, to bless these tithes and offerings, but we are also wanting to hold for about 30 seconds love and peace for the peoples that have experienced hurricane destruction. Let's just see them being open to receive help from many different locations, from many different people. Be with us in this now moment. May we celebrate the blessings that each of us has in this now moment. A home to go to, and a pillow to lay our head on, and food in our refrigerator. And we know that we are bigger than that as a global community. And so, Living Loving Spirit, may you bless these tithes and offerings. And may we begin as a spiritual community bringing in so much that we can give to those who are in need. And so it is. Amen.
Becky asked to read and clarify one thing for me. Town hall meeting is as soon as the service is over and people get back in here, right?
Yes.
Not 1 o'clock. So don't go get lunch. Just go on out, hug Denise's neck, and come on
Actually,
back
I'm staying in
in
here.
All right? Say this
Actually,
along.
I'm staying in here.
She's staying in here. You can't even hug her out there, so just stay here. Let's say this together, if we will, please. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well.